In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the way that I like to work the 1x1 tubular long tail cast on. The tubular cast on is a really nice finish for anywhere you want a really elastic edge with a nice clean professional finish. It's great for hat brims, for the necklines of sweaters, basically anywhere you want just a little just kind of special finish. You can see it gives the appearance of the ribbing kind of wrapping around the edge. So it's just a little bit tidier looking than a standard long tail cast on. And it's a little bit trickier to work, but not really. It's just a few more steps and it's not difficult at all. It just takes a wee bit of practice. So the way that I like to work this stitch is, or this cast on rather, I'm gonna start with a slip knot. I need a tail long enough for the number of stitches I'm casting on, as with any long tail cast on. So I'm doing about 20 stitches for the purposes of this video. So I'll go, sorry, I got tangled up yarn. That's probably long enough for me. So I'm gonna work just put a slip knot on my needle. All right, and we're gonna be alternating purl and knit cast on stitches because we're doing 1x1 ribbing. So because this little slip knot has a bump there, I'm treating it like a purl stitch. So my next cast on stitch is going to be a knit cast on. So I'm going to hold the yarn the same way I do for a long tail cast on. I'm going to anchor both tails between my lower fingers, and then I'm going to split the yarn with my index finger and my thumb. And the working yarn, that's the yarn that's attached to the ball, is over my index finger, and the tail yarn, that's the one that's loose and you know, not attached to anything. That one goes over my thumb. And I always anchor my stitch on the needle with my right finger just to keep things lined up and tidy. It can get twisted around and messy if you don't do that. So it's really helpful to keep it anchored there. So we're gonna work a knit cast on for the tubular cast on. And the way I do this is I'm gonna take my needle over my thumb yarn and scoop it up from underneath. So I bring it in front, under, and scoop it up. And now I'm back between the two yarns, and I'm gonna go over and behind both yarns. So over and behind them both. And that's it. You can see a little knit cast on stitch there. Sorry, you shouldn't let go of your yarns like I do. I just kind of making sure you can see what I'm doing. And so the next one I'm going to cast on will be a purl, and the way you work a purl cast on stitch is you're going to go over and behind both yarns, and now through the middle and scoop up the top yarn. So back behind and scoop up that index finger yarn, and you can see it's got a little bump there for a purl stitch. You've got purl, knit, purl. You can see the pattern beginning to be established. I like to give it just a little tug as I work to keep them, you know, tight-ish. You don't want to strangle your needle. You'll have a really difficult time working this cast on if you make it too tight, but tight enough to be tidy. So now that we've done a purl, it's time to do another knit. Just like before, we're going to scoop up the thumb yarn, like so. Scoop up the thumb, and then back behind and under them both, like so. And now for a purl, behind them both, and scoop up that index finger from the back like that. Okay, and I'm just re-grasping my yarn as I need to kind of keep myself feeling in control here. That's always important, is to feel like you're the boss of your yarn. All right, time for a knit, which is under the thumb, behind them both. For a purl, behind them both, under the index. Under the thumb, behind them both, behind them both, under the index. And if you take a look here, you can see the pattern being established. So purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. I'm going to do a few more, and I'll just work And I like to repeat in my head the little sort of rhyme, I guess, to keep myself remembering what I'm doing. So now that I've done a purl, it's time for a knit. So under the thumb, behind them both, behind them both, under the index, under the thumb, behind them both, behind them both, under the index, under the thumb, behind them both, whoop, behind them both, under the index. And for another knit, so under the thumb, behind them both, behind them both, under the index. And I don't know why, but I always tend to just kind of slip down my yarn. Maybe I don't anchor it very tightly, but so I like to just kind of re-grasp it and get, you know, get in control again, like I was saying. All right, just a few more stitches. I'm going to do under the thumb, behind them both, behind them both, under the index, under the thumb, behind them both, behind them both, under the index. And because I'm working in the round, I'm going to do an even number of stitches because I want my pattern to work out. So I started with a purl, so I'm going to want to end with a knit stitch. So I just did a purl, so I'll do one more knit stitch. So under the thumb, behind them both. Okay, and now comes the, I guess, fun part of the tubular cast on. We are going to work 2 foundational rows flat before we join and start working in the round. This actually makes it easier to avoid twisting your stitches, which is a pretty common thing to do when you're doing something, especially with more stitches on the needle. So in some ways this does make your knitting just a little bit easier. All right, so I'm gonna hold this stitch and I'm gonna actually twist the yarns just one more time because they're not really anchored there, as you can see. So I'm just gonna twist the tail around that last knit stitch just so it doesn't go anywhere. I'm gonna hold those yarns together like that, and then I'm gonna turn my work. I'm gonna pull out a little bit more working yarn for myself here. Okay, now still holding that just to keep it steady. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna work across, making sure you're using your working yarn, not your tail. This is a mistake I make frequently. So I've got my working yarn here that's attached to the ball. We're gonna work across all these stitches, and every cast on stitch that appears as a knit, we're going to knit, and every cast on stitch that is a purl, we're going to be slipping. And so because we've turned it, the ones that we cast on as a knit appears a purl on this side. So our first one here is a purl, if that makes sense. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna slip that first stitch with the yarn in front. So slip it purlwise, which means going in right to left with the yarn in front, and then bring your yarn back to the back. And then we're just kind of like pull the tail a little bit to keep that stitch. That last stitch is always a little bit finicky, but it cleans up once you start knitting in the round, and especially after you weave in your ends and everything when you're all done. So don't worry too much about it. So the next stitch is a knit. So we are going to just knit it just normally. And now for the next purl stitch, bring the yarn to the front. So bring it between your needles and hold it in front, and just slip that stitch purlwise and bring the yarn back to the back and knit. You can do this English or continental. I personally tend to work ribbing continental, or I'm sorry, English. That's just my preference. But you can easily do this continental, where you just hold it in your left hand and you bring the yarn to the front, slip that stitch purlwise, and then knit the next stitch, slip, knit. I'm going back to English because it's just more comfortable for me. Now it's time for a slip with the yarn in front, knit, slip, knit, slip, all the way across until you get to the end, almost there. Okay, and then our last one is that slip knot that we started with, and we're just going to knit that. Okay, now your work should look like this. Not especially pretty, but that's how it is. And now we just turn it, and we're gonna work back across, doing the exact same thing, slipping the purl stitches and knitting the knit stitches. And so the ones that were worked on the last row are slipped this time, and the ones that were slipped last time get knit this time. So this first one here is a purl, so I'm going to slip it with the yarn in front, just exactly the same as last time. So bring the yarn to the back, knit, yarn in front, slip, yarn to the back, knit, yarn to the front, slip, knit, and you just continue doing this until you get to the end. And if you're kind of a slow knitter like me, it might take you a little while. I'm faster at working in the round. It's just these flat rows in the ribbing always take me what feels like forever. This is also where, when I'm teaching in class, I start chatting with the students and typically get distracted and make a mistake in my own work. So I'm trying not to do that right now, but it's hard. Okay. Knit, slip, knit, slip, knit, slip, and our last one is a knit. All right, and so you have this nice little foundation. You can see the beginnings of that tubular ribbing kind of curving over your edge. And so from here, you would just bring it around and join to start working in the round as you would for any other project. You end up with a tiny bit of a gap at the edge, but you can just rectify that when you weave in your ends. It is not really messy or a problem, and it's quite tidy. And I just want to give a reminder that, as with all knitting techniques, there are so many ways to do everything. So this is just my way of doing it. I like it because it doesn't use any extra tools like a crochet hook or extra needles, and I'm always struggling to find the things I need, so that's just kind of my lazy preferred method. But I hope this was helpful for you. Feel free to drop a comment with a question, and see you back for the next tutorial. Thanks.